right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Um, Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited for today's session. Um, and today's session is entitled Tools for Advancing Creative Aging. This learning series session is a component of a multi-year partnership between the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies and EA Michelson Philanthropy. My name is Megan McFerrin. I'm NASAA's Arts Learning Projects Director, and I will be moderating today's session. Before we begin, I'm very pleased to introduce Tiffany Baumer, who will be our Zoom producer throughout the event. If you have any Zoom-related technical questions during our presentations today, please private chat Tiffany. Zoom's automatic captioning feature is enabled. If you would like to see captions, please locate the CC icon on your toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will be recording today's session, and the recordings will be available on NASAA's Learning Series webpage, where you can also find recordings of prior sessions. And Tiffany will share that link in the chat for those of you who haven't visited that page before. As I mentioned, NASAA is able to offer this event and upcoming creative aging focused sessions through the support of EA Michelson Philanthropy. Since 2020, the support has made it possible for NASAA to lead a series of national initiatives focused on strengthening how state arts agencies serve older adults through the arts. The first initiative was leveraging state investments in creative aging, followed by states leading creative aging, and our current initiative, which is Creative Aging, Creative Futures. I encourage you to explore the resources and reports from all three initiatives, which are available on NASAA's website. Today's session is one of 6 creative aging focused learning series sessions being offered through this initiative between now and late 2028. I hope you'll join future sessions. Again, we are grateful to EA Michelson Philanthropy for their continued partnership and support of this work. All right, so let's dive in. Today's session, Tools for Advancing Creative Aging, introduces NASAA's new Vital and Vibrant Creative Aging Toolkit alongside Lifetime Arts National Brief, Creative Aging in the Healthy Aging Ecosystem, Advancing Brain Health, Social Connectedness, and Livable Communities. So together, these complementary resources explore how the arts can support healthy aging initiatives and strengthen cross-sector collaboration. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speakers and will allow them to say hello and introduce themselves. First, we have Susan Oetgen, my predecessor, former NASAA Arts Learning Projects Director. Susan's leadership and vision helped shape NASAA's creative aging work in lasting ways, and we're thrilled to welcome her back today. Susan?
Thank you so much, Megan. It's great to see you. Great to be here just to say a word or two about my role and what I'm up to. So again, my name is Susan Oetgen. As Megan mentioned, I served as NASAA's Arts Learning Projects Director until the end of 2025. I joined the NASAA team back in 2014 as the manager of the K-12 Arts Education Professional Development Institute. And along the way, at some point, NASAA and EA Michelson Philanthropy joined forces to launch this work in creative aging, starting with the leveraging states' investments in creative aging. And I had the very joyful opportunity to expand my portfolio at NASAA as state arts agencies started to expand their work in creative aging. And I supported that initiative. I'm really proud to have been part of that, as well as the second initiative that NASAA led in partnership with EA Michelson Philanthropy, the state's leading creative aging initiative, and then to launch with Megan and others on the NASAA team, the Creative Aging, Creative Futures initiative. I recently transitioned in my career to the field of clinical mental health counseling, and I'm currently working right now as a resident in counseling in the field of psycho-oncology at a hospital system here in Northern Virginia. And I just want to say, to kind of set the table for this conversation, that the opportunity that I had to learn about and really focus on creative aging, in particular the importance of social connection, has been foundational and a critical bridge from my work at NASAA into my new role in healthcare.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm now pleased to introduce Heather Ikemire, Executive Director at Lifetime Arts. Lifetime Arts has been a valued long-term partner in NASAA's creative aging initiatives, and we're grateful for their continued leadership and collaboration in this work. Heather.
Thanks, Megan. It's so great to be here. So great to be in conversation with you, Susan. Susan and I have been collaborators for a while, and so really excited for the conversation that we're having today. A little bit about me. As Megan said, I've been the executive director at Lifetime Arts for just about 4 years. Prior to that, I was chief program officer for another national organization called the National Guild for Community Arts Education. And I had the great privilege in the beginning of my tenure there. I started in 2007 to be part of a team at the Guild that was really promoting Dr. Jean Cohen's creativity and aging study and the work of creative aging within the arts education field, which it had really like sent ripples through that, wow, arts education matters to us throughout the lifespan and actually has significant health and wellness benefits. So in my tenure there early on, I was part of the team that produced and helped to promote Creativity Matters, the Arts and Aging Toolkit, which was a practical toolkit to help translate what we do in the arts to the aging services sector and vice versa, and really provided some tangible tools for partnership. You can still find there's still copies in circulation. People show them to me all the time. And it really became a passion of mine to work with community-based organizations around the country who often had, in the arts, who had missions like Arts for All to really expand the work they were doing to focus on lifelong learning in the arts and to include older adults in their strategic plans and priorities. And then I had the great fortune to come and work with the team here at Lifetime Arts about 4 years ago. And Lifetime Arts is a national and leading training and advocacy organization for creative aging. We've been doing this work really since that same time that I started at the Guild. The founders of Lifetime Arts were also like, great. So there's a lot of interest in this. How do we practically help folks do this work in ways that really have those short and long-term benefits for older people and for all of us as we age? So we do that we do this work in two ways. Our goal is really to weave creative aging into the fabric of our communities. And we do that by training. So we train artists to adapt what they do to older adult learners. We support community-based organizations and state agencies to support this work in all sorts of ways. And then we also work, what I like to say, sort of at the grass tops level, to establish creative aging as a core component of healthy aging policy and state plans. And so we do that work through partnership development, knowledge sharing, knowledge building, and also supporting states and local communities through technical assistance in embedding creative aging into policy and practice. So it's great to be here.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. As you all can see, we have two absolute powerhouses and experts here, so it's going to be a great conversation. During this session, Susan and Heather will introduce new tools designed to strengthen creative aging work. But before we dive into those resources, we want to, take a moment to step back and look at the bigger picture. How has creative aging evolved in recent years? What's shaping the field today? And what does that mean for both state arts agencies and the broader ecosystem supporting older adults? Following this opening discussion, Heather and Susan will share their respective resources, and we will then transition into a Q&A session. So we invite you to utilize the chat for questions, connections, discussion throughout the session today. All right, so let's get started with the first question, Susan and Heather. From your perspective, what recent developments in creative aging have been most significant, and how are they influencing the work of both state arts agencies and community-based organizations?
I invite you to dive us right in.
Yeah, I think I was thinking about this question in preparation for today, and I think before talking about what's changing in creative aging, I think it's important to name what's changing around us that is impacting creative aging. I think there's some incredibly strong tailwinds to support the acceleration of creative aging as a practice throughout our work. The first is just our growing aging population. I've been doing this work for a long time. This is not new news, but the attention to it is profound. right? I don't think there's a sector that our work intersects with that is not starting to pay attention to the growing aging population in our country and realize that their business models have to change, their relationship to their communities have to change, and that they actually can't meet this moment without partnering. And so I think that is a significant change, I think, from when I started in this work almost 20 years ago. And I think in relation to that, then there are more holistic approaches being developed to how we meet the needs, the very diverse needs and interests of older adults, and the different ways that we age and how systems impact the way that we age. And I guess I'll just say one last thing is the huge tailwind, I think, related to that in aging, a shifting definition of what health is, right? So, I love to use the World Health Organization's definition of aging as a state, or health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And I think when we've been thinking about aging historically in this country, we think about it from a deficit model. And I think as particularly in public health, as perceptions of health have shifted, coupled with this sort of tailwind around the growing aging population, and starting to realize that is not, yes, there's things that we have to consider, but there's huge opportunities for us as we age in that. There's real positivity, right, in terms of what our lives can look like, and what that can mean for our communities as we contribute to community as we age. That sandwich coupled with the arts is their shifting perception of the arts, right? That arts is no longer, oh, this nice to have, but is actually like a critical component of the infrastructure of healthy aging. And so I think those three things, that triangle around health, aging, and the arts, there's linkage there that is new, right? And there's an opportunity there for us to kind of come into this work along those points of the triangle, but also look at sort of how they speak to each other. That is really expanding, I think, how folks are approaching creative aging and where it sits within these larger kind of systems level conversations, as well as conversations at the local community level.
Yes, I'm sort of taking notes because for folks who have not had the opportunity to sit with Heather and me while we're having our one-to-one conversations over the years, there is nothing I like better than a conversation with Heather Ikemire about creative aging. And I get so many new ideas. And so I'm writing some things down as you're speaking. And what comes to mind, just to respond a little bit, is the point that you're making about what healthy aging looks like and sort of the changing paradigm, how we're defining aging. Some years ago in a creative aging institute that NASAA put on, and we can find the recording for this and really cite this, we had a researcher and professor of art therapy who has deep background in creative aging, and in fact was part of the Cohen study, the original Cohen study. Her presentation on sort of what is aging and healthy aging, and a concept that she shared that I had never heard before was gerotranscendence. That there's actually sort of a research behind this idea that as we age, not only do we find ourselves, like in a place of wisdom and elderhood, but that we're actually like transcending and learning, and our growth mindset continues to develop all the way until the end of life. And that doesn't change just because we're ending, approaching end of life. In fact, it gets more powerful.
Yeah, I love
so
that.
That's one thought. Yeah, great word. The other just sort of quick reflection I wanted to share about was that triangle that you're pointing out between healthy aging, arts, and the policy infrastructure. Is that what the other?
I was public health, health, aging, and the arts. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. So the potential of the arts as an expressive mechanism of self-expression and receptivity for other people's expression, either at the individual level or social, cultural level, that is inherently about social connection, which is inherently about health. And so I think that triangle, you're really onto something there. And for me, it really comes down to that expression and reception. Picking up from there, go ahead. Sorry, Heather.
No, go ahead.
You're going to say. Just to answer the question that Megan put forth to us here, some thoughts that I've been having about kind of what developments have we been seeing that are significant. Similarly, my observation here is not like new news for creative aging as much as sort of a new angle on my understanding of social connection as really important to the work of creative aging. And this is a real affirmation of the work that Lifetime Arts has been doing and state arts agencies have been doing, and E.A. Michelson as well. So in 2023, just to remind folks that then Surgeon General Vivek Murthy sort of took on social isolation and loneliness as a big topic of public health. And under his leadership, the Office of the Surgeon General published an advisory it's entitled Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Social Isolation. And that advisory makes incredible evidence-based cases that loneliness and social isolation are very significant risk factors for our individual and social health. And older adults are particularly vulnerable to that. And I remember when that came out in 2023, being really excited because it really was this direct link to the work that we've been doing at NASAA with state arts agencies and creative aging, and that you all have been doing for a long time too. But my appreciation for this research has really grown over time, and especially sort of stepping into this new role in healthcare and seeing the impacts of social isolation and loneliness from a clinical point of view in a clinical context. It has occurred to me that social isolation and loneliness it adds to people's suffering. So that right there is a problem, right? But it's also something that we cannot address through the healthcare system in an easy way. We see it, we identify it as an impact on our health and well-being, but we don't really have a system that is able to step in to provide support for that. And I would just add that even when we're talking about art therapy or sort of any kind of mental health counseling or therapy, even that doesn't address what creative aging programs and teaching artists can bring to the table, because in some ways, the ethical boundaries of the practice of therapy or counseling are different than what teaching artists can provide in this context, which is just authentic social connection. There is a really important role for teaching artists and community-based organizations to step into the gap that we have identified and really provide the service that's needed here. So I've been thinking a lot about that, about the social connection as foundational to this work. And then the other development that's also just kind of not new news, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about as our conversation goes on, is that at the kind of policy level, there have been so many new opportunities for multi-sector collaboration and this recognition of the interconnectedness of, state arts agencies, departments of health, departments of aging. And that is something that state arts agencies are really starting to lean into more and get seats at the table. And I think that's really what brings us to the core of our conversation today.
Yeah, Susan, I would just signal too, I think for a long time, right, there's been this impulse of well, how do we demonstrate that these benefits are real, right? And there's a proliferation of research happening right now that's being driven, by the Epi Arts Lab and Johns Hopkins around brain health and Jameel Arts Center and others around the country, Stanford. That's really exciting, not only in terms of making linkage between arts, health, and well-being broadly, but actually specifically focusing on older adults, which is not actually something that I saw in the conversation as much when I started out in this work, right? And even some of the research around arts and social connectedness has leaned heavily on youth mental health early on. And it's just really exciting to see studies that are focused on older adults and aging specifically. I mean, I think just yesterday there was an article in The Guardian that lifted up some new research out of University of College London that linked arts engagement to slower rate of biological aging and longevity.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
almost every day I'm seeing like,
Yeah.
there was another study recently about, really benefits in terms of reducing frailty, right? But I think to your point, Susan, that aging isn't just about older adults. It's actually about all of us. None of us escape the aging club. And if, as the conversation in the arts and health movement really, and, health, public health in particular is focusing on social drivers, or you've heard that term, social determinants of health. The more we engage in life early on, right, the benefits accrue, right? And so I think that is also, I think expands the conversation. I think there's benefit to doing this work, particularly for older adults. But I think the long view is a culture shift where we recognize the really powerful role of arts as a social driver of health throughout our lifespans, which is driving a different kind of policy conversation, and also just sort of behavioral shift, right? Like Dr. Jill Sankey, who's a Stanford Cultural Fellow and colleague through the University of Florida Arts and Medicine, likes to call it the seatbelt moment in arts and health, where I'm 49. I remember jumping in my mom's like Oldsmobile station wagon, and I don't even think they had seatbelts in the car. And now, if I get to the edge of my driveway and I don't have my seatbelt on, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a shock, right? Because it's such muscle memory. And I think that's what we're talking about, is we want more programs, but ultimately we want arts engagement and the recognition that arts is really an essential part of our lives, to be that muscle memory, right? And then for systems to sort of adopt that and embed that. So I think that's a change, because I think, years ago, there was a lot, it's just like recognizing that the arts matter. How do we do these programs well? Raising the visibility that this even, what is creative aging? I think we're shifting into a more expansive conversation, building on that foundation at this time. And I do think, I was just going to mention that there are a lot of state agencies, I'll talk a little bit about it more related to the policy brief, but we work with a number of state arts agencies through an initiative called Creative Aging in the West. We work with 6 states in the West explicitly to support them in building cross-sector state teams for creative aging in their states that are supporting training and capacity building on the ground, but actually working together to identify natural entry points for creative aging, both at the state policy plan level, but also through like existing infrastructure, like festivals across the state,
Yes.
right? Like where's their work already happening that we can plug into, that we can only really plug into if we work together, right? And we are building on sort of existing infrastructure and trust-based relationships across our states.
Just going back real quick to the conversation about research and health care. I think another shift is that, there's been in the sort of trajectory of, and I call it like the validation of creative aging as a good investment, right? There's been this sort of idea or need or expectation that having research and evidence that really shows maybe like a clinically relevant healthcare outcome is important to validating the practice, right? And there's kind of this, there's like, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, I think, because I think on the one hand, it is certainly interesting to know that and useful to know that, and important in the sense that we are trying to build this intersectional partnerships across lots of different sectors, and healthcare is related. But it's not, I think, it doesn't validate creative aging as something that we know to be really important and really useful. Like, in other words, we don't need the validation, but it's great to have it from the evidence that we are seeing. And since creative aging may be, but doesn't have to be, about health in terms of illness, it's really about well-being. It's important, I think, to sort of keep clarity about, the arts are just good for us and they're preventative.
Yeah, and I know Megan's going to jump in with her second question, but before you do so, Megan, like I think that that's the main thing. I think there is a very strong tailwind around the arts and health movement, but I think we have to remember in that conversation when we talk about health, it is that broader definition, and actually it's not a conversation that is siloed in clinical health, right? Or even public health, right? It's actually, the point is that all of our sectors actually contribute essentially to healthy aging, because as people, as bodies, right, as beings, we are not compartmentalized in the way that sectors are compartmentalized. We exist throughout them. And so solutions to healthy aging actually require approaches that are holistic.
Beautifully said.
This is such great conversation, and really value some of these things that you're pointing out and the connections around, beginning with this being a thinking in a way that is asset-based around positivity, contribution, expression, the emphasis on social connection, the differences between arts and health. Heather, I love the definition you shared of health, and I think that's a really important framework for this work to move from, and also the importance of systems level work, which leads to a second question, which is, given all of these developments that you all have given an overview of, where do you see the greatest opportunities right now for strengthening creative aging efforts?
Yeah, and really quickly, I just see a note in the chat about reciting that definition, and I want to make sure not to paraphrase it. So I will. The definition is through the World Health Organization, and the definition is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Thank you, Daniela. Okay, so opportunities for state agencies and community-based organizations. I'm going to get into this a little bit in talking about the policy brief. I think we already named it. I mean, I think that there's a huge opportunity for states to align with what's already happening in their state policy plans and local age-friendly initiatives. We're seeing a lot of that. There's an opportunity for increased visibility and partnership with the private sector. So I'm going to talk about that in a bit. I wanted to point out one big thing that I think is a change and an opportunity is this is a time to think outside the box. We have to think outside the box to show up for community, which is in flux, right? We are changing. The world around us isn't changing. Policies are changing, right? And so to drive innovation and bring this work to scale in ways that are really responsive to the communities that we're trying to serve, we're going to have to think outside the box and be adaptive. And I think that that's something that we've really learned and seen in our work through other states. I mean, I think that early on, creative aging was defined as different approaches, right? And I think that we need to blur the lines there, right? Because as we're living longer, right, how we're living, what we're experiencing physically, mentally, right, it's all in a spectrum and is overlapped, right? We don't live in stages in those concrete ways, right? And certainly there's many people who participate in arts learning, sort of sequential arts programming that have dementia, right? And we know that there's a need for intergenerational programming. And so I think just an opportunity to partner, even to kind of adapt what we do, whatever that looks like in your own practice, to the needs and interests of the communities that we're serving, and also in mindful ways that recognize the constraints that different organizations and settings for this work are really facing. Right? Because their systems are working. How funding is flowing from the federal level and the state level is really impacting different spaces where this work happens. And this work is happening everywhere, right? It's happening in veterans' homes, health systems, older adult centers, housing, right? And so how it looks in those different spaces can't be a one size fits all. And I think that's a real opportunity for partnership too, is to build with those different types of organizations and communities to really adapt what we know is, the evidence points to things that will really succeed and build a foundation for this work in the future.
I have a lot of similar thoughts. I would maybe offer that between Lifetime Arts and NASAA, and there are other organizations out there too, who are doing this work of linking the big picture policy environment all the way to the very boots on the ground, grass levels programming that's happening. There's such this huge broad spectrum of like where creative aging work can happen. And so, to your point, Heather, like we are not living in a world of infinite resources, infinite time, predictable outcomes. And so understanding that there is this really broad opportunity to engage in this work and really sort of identifying what is most strategic for you as an organization, for you as an individual, and just really leaning into that and trusting that there are, like I said, organizations like Lifetime Arts, the Michelson Philanthropy, the state arts agencies at the state level, NASAA at a national level, who are kind of holding and carrying the this very broad field, and that you can find your way in to the place that you're going to have the most impact in the work that you're doing, and focusing in on that. I think part of that too, more and more, I think about how personally defining for yourself as a practitioner, for myself as a practitioner, whether your level of practice is about being a teaching artist or a community-based arts organization executive director or an arts learning specialist at a state arts agency, personally defining like why is creative aging meaningful for you? Why is the social connection part of creative aging or the health part or the arts part of creative aging like personally meaningful for you? I think that's really important because Heather pointed out earlier, like this really is about all of us. Like aging is a big, broad category, and we're serving people from age 55 to whenever. And there's a lot of room in there to sort of understand what the goals and the needs are for the people that we're serving or that we want to serve. And I do think that starting with what's important to us and having clarity about why do we personally enter into this space with hope and expectation that it's valuable work is a really great way to kind of get grounded in this very broad field where there are a lot of possibilities and maybe fewer resources than we would hope at this moment in time.
Thank you both so much. This focus on adaptability, personalized values, relevance, I think really is a perfect segue into hearing about these resources that do so much to help people think through these exact things of what does this look like in your agency, in your context, to you as an individual, and then what do we do with that? So without further ado, let's transition into hearing about the policy brief to begin. Heather.
Great. All right. Hopefully this works. You all see that okay?
Yeah.
Looks good. Okay, great. Um, just a little bit, I'm going to talk about the policy brief, Creative Aging and the Healthy Aging Ecosystem, that was just released in February after about a year's work. We partnered with Dr. Gretchen Alkema, who is a leading aging policy expert in the country, runs Wolf Eagle Enterprises, and worked for over 20 years at the SCAN Foundation as their VP of Policy and Advocacy. And we also engaged a 5-member working group to advise us on this project and provide input. And they represented experts across public health, aging, and the arts, including Dr. Jill Sankey, who I quoted earlier about this seatbelt moment. And why did we do this? In that I said that Lifetime Arts had really been focused for all of its, most of its work, and continues to focus on supporting organizations, state agencies, and individuals in building capacity. But a couple of years ago, we did a pretty extensive strategic planning process. We interviewed over 100 stakeholders at intersections of this work. And in almost every interview and focus group, this question of like, this is great, I get it, but how do you get it to stick came up in different iterations in almost every conversation. And so that really drove us to kind of lean into that question and develop sort of a plan for how do you establish creative aging as a core and essential element at the policy and planning level, right? That can help to really drive more programming, access, availability, and impact in this field. So we did a landscape analysis of the policy, of the aging policy and health landscape, and really produced a brief that lays out a bold and evidence-based case for embedding creative aging into America's healthy aging agenda, using that word health very broadly, right? This is a multi-sector endeavor. And we specifically highlight its impact on brain health, social connectedness, and livable communities. And so that is the framework by which we really put forward several key and clear policy recommendations. And the audience for this is cross-sector leaders. So we work across sectors, not only in the arts field. And so this is designed for state agencies of all sectors, government leaders, advocacy organizations, and community-based leaders in doing this work across sectors. And what it does, and how it does that is first, we put forward a definition of creative aging, not as a particular program or approach, but really as a cross-sector strategy for achieving, this vision of kind of creative aging being embedded throughout our communities. It positions, again, creative aging as a practice, an evidence-based practice that benefits the larger community and healthy aging landscape. This is the definition, that creative aging is the practice of intentional artistic and creative engagement throughout our lives to support our health, connection, and purpose as we age. So we were really intentional to kind of thread that needle in a way that is inclusive of many different approaches to this work. And it really rests in sort of the belief that creativity is part of what it means to be human. It's part of all of us as we age. That doesn't mean we all have opportunities to maximize our creative potential as we move through our lives or in different systems, but a belief that it's there and that we should be providing those opportunities as we age. And it's grounded in a wealth of health promotion research that I know that Susan I spoke to earlier, and that I know is really part of NASAA's toolkit as well. Specifically, it links trending issues in healthy aging, specifically that are cross-cutting to in public health and aging, as state and local leaders are defining priorities for their healthy aging agendas now. And I think that's the point I want to underscore, if you take nothing away from this conversation, but this point is because of the rapid growth of the aging population in this country, right now, your states are setting priorities for healthy aging, not only now, but in sometimes for the next 10 years. They're doing it right now. And creative aging links to priorities that are top of mind across sectors as it comes to how do we meet this moment and best serve our constituents. And as we did that landscape analysis, the three trending issues were brain health, social connectedness, and livable communities. Your local communities, in many ways, are also setting these priorities for healthy aging. And I think there's real opportunity to connect with local age-friendly initiatives in cities and even small rural towns where creative aging is a natural alignment and complement to some of the priorities and plans that are being set. It identifies some real significant barrier mindsets that kind of prevents people from adopting the arts in these plans. The one that I think we're familiar with is that arts is a luxury after all the basic needs are met. I think it also looks at sort of this belief that capacity for active engagement in the arts, particularly for those living with chronic conditions or functional decline, isn't possible. And that's really a symptom of ageism and ableism, right? So it kind of busts that myth open. This is a map that I'll send out to you all. It's and you can find it on our website too. It's also building on the fact that many states are already embedding language around arts, music, and creative aging into their Older Americans Act state plans. And so those are mandatory for every state to have an OAA plan, right, which informs how money flows down to your AAAs and in many cases, your Department of Aging that then, to Susan's point, is distributed to community partners to help with things like transportation and meals and community programs. So arts are named in many of those, right? And you'll see that in these little states with a triangle. Those are states that have mention of arts and music. So you can point to those already and say, look, this is a strategy for delivering on what we need to for our older adults. But there's also a movement in this country to develop what is called a multi-sector plan for aging. And those are the orange and pink states in this map. Those are states that are either have a plan that is under development or is in a stage of implementation. And these, unlike your OAA plan, which rests usually in your Department of Aging, these are those multi-sector plans that they are 10-year plans. They are revisited every 2 years. And they require community input. So these are opportunities for every single person on this call is to go to multisectorplanforaging.org, see where your state is in this process if they have one. They're often complements to your OAA plan, and see where they're at and where there might be opportunities for you to submit some model language to embed in those plans, show up at community forums, or even sit on a working group that is guiding implementation. And those implementation efforts renew often every 2 years. So there's an opportunity, I think, to build on this momentum in every state. These are the recommendations. There's a lot more detail in the brief. I'm talking fast because I want to make sure that Susan has a chance to talk too about her resource. But the first is just that we can't do any of this policy work without elevating the awareness of creative aging and its linkage. And in our case, it's, looking at those 3 levers. But there's ways that you can do this, even without a big media firm, right? It's including language around older adults in grant initiatives that you already have in your strategic plans, right? It's showing up at some of these meetings. Many states do a needs assessment survey when they're renewing their Older Americans Act plan every 2, 3, or 4 years. It could be reaching out and asking to get some questions around the role of arts and arts participation in your life and what you would desire, how that matters to your sense of quality of life, right? There's opportunities to embed questions, which then drive data, which then informs policy. The second was embed creative aging in state and federal policies and local age-friendly initiatives. I can talk a little bit more about how we're doing that, but this is about low-hanging fruit. We like to call it sort of radical incrementalism. First and foremost, it's about getting creative aging language, whether you call it creative aging or arts and music engagement, creative aging language or model concepts into your state plans or your local age-friendly initiatives and plans. Naming it in those plans, even if you don't or the state agencies don't have money to support it yet, to Susan's point earlier, it drives messaging that this is something that's core to healthy aging, that it matters, and that your state agencies think is important. And then local community-based organizations can point to that in their conversations with their community foundations and other funders as well. So I think state agencies have an important role beyond a funding role and an education role, is to really champion this work and to talk to communities about its importance, even if you don't have funds right now to support it. And the last is a whole body of recommendations and tactics around accelerating diffusion and investment of creative aging in the private sector. And I think this recognizes that, universities, nonprofit organizations, corporations, even private sort of continuing care retirement communities, right? They have resources that can invest in innovative models of creative aging and help bring them to scale, right? And so we unpack a little bit of that opportunity in the brief as well. I wanted to, if folks haven't seen the brief, there's a QR code there and a link to access it. It's free. Please read it, share it widely. And then I also wanted to mention that this June, as a complement piece to the policy brief, Lifetime Arts will be publishing a practical toolkit that is meant to support you in starting to implement the recommendations of our policy brief within that framework of healthy aging and those three trending issues, brain health, social connectedness, and livable communities. It's meant for any sector to gain confidence in creating their own messaging and outreach strategies. So we don't have sort of a lot of templates in there. It's really about building capacity. It's about supporting you and sort of adapting your messaging to align with the priorities of the audience you're speaking to specifically, and to identify who are those influencers and where are those natural entry points for alignment in your community or in your work across approaches. We will be doing a training on that on June 10th. So that's that QR code, and I invite all of you to come join us.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. That was fantastic. And it just underscores this moment in creative aging where there are all of these new resources at once, between what you're sharing and the toolkit that's coming up, as well as NASAA's Vital and Vibrant Creative Aging Toolkit. Also want to say I love that phrase. I want to make sure I'm getting it right. Radical incrementalism. So great. And I think it really speaks to the next steps, right? Of whatever size your next steps are. And I hope that these tools will give everyone a next step in these conversations. Whatever size it is, it matters and it's valuable. So thank you for sharing that. All right, I'm going to pass it to Susan.
Thanks, Megan. And thank you, Heather. I'm going to share in the chat actually a bunch of links right now that I'm going to bridge into from Heather's presentation into what NASAA has cooking. These are a lot of documents that sort of outline what's happening at the federal level in terms of our aging policy. And there's a link there that's also the NASAA toolkit. So we have just published in the last month and a half a creative aging toolkit called Vital and Vibrant. We worked with a strategic communications firm, for goodness sakes, to develop this. And for goodness sakes, was able to conduct several focus groups and individual interviews. And they did a lot of research with our state arts agency grantees, as well as taking account of the outcomes that we learned from our leveraging state investments in creative aging and states leading creative aging grant initiatives. So with all of this information kind of grounding their research, they helped us create this toolkit, which in distinction from what Heather was just presenting, is really designed specifically for state arts agencies to use in kind of like a more tactical way as state arts agencies are developing what their radical increments are entering into this work. One thing that NASAA is very clear about is that state arts agencies, 56 state and jurisdictional agencies, are coming at creative aging work from really different experience bases, populations, structures of their own state arts agency. So instead of assuming that every single state arts agency is at the same place with the same resources, with the same needs, we really tried to design this so that it could meet a lot of different needs and recognize that state arts agencies are always going to have different approaches and different needs when it comes to really implementing something as big as creative aging in their work. So it consists of, by the way, I also just want to note that this was part of the work that has been made possible through the state's leading creative aging initiative that was funded by our partners at Michelson Philanthropy. 5 basic components. The first one is a publication that we call Vital. And this is kind of an issue awareness document that makes the case for why healthy aging depends on the arts. It's a kind of leave behind publication. It's in PDF form. It can be sent and shared with prospective partners and funders. And the idea here is that it documents the measurable health and cost benefits of arts-based interventions for older adults. It's not a deep dive into the health and cost benefits, but it positions the idea of arts in the language of health and costs that are oftentimes the languages that some of the partners that state arts agencies would like to be partnering with speak. Like Heather has mentioned, it does make the case that creative aging is not a luxury, that it's part of prevention, participation, and purpose as we age. And it does highlight a lot of the momentum that has been happening thanks to A.A. Michelson Philanthropy's investments in the State Arts Agency Network. This is for conversations with lawmakers, community leaders, folks in the aging sector, and funders as well. The next component is a more internal document that we're calling Vibrant. And this is a companion to Vital in the sense that it's kind of a practical action guide that takes what is offered publicly through the previous component and really breaks down for state arts agencies how to put it into practice in leading or initiating cross-sector creative aging coalitions. So there are sort of, 5 stages of implementation that are considered in this guidebook. It identifies possible coalition partners, importantly, including the state units on aging, area agencies on aging, senior centers, all of whom were part of the focus group research that, for goodness sakes, helped us with so that we know the messages in this implementation guide are really tailored for those key stakeholder partners, as well as libraries, museums, and other community-based organizations. And the purpose here is just to provide really practical step-by-step guidance for bringing people around the same table, cultivating a shared vision, setting a common agenda, defining roles, like really getting into the weeds of the tactics that are necessary to, launch and ground and sustain the work of partnering. Next up is a messaging matrix. This is also a document that we would say is probably more internal, not something that we would recommend sharing publicly, but for the purposes of folks who are really trying to tailor their message for specific audiences. It's a strategic communication framework to help with what's the right language for the right audience in the creative aging ecosystem. And it does provide targeted messages and talking points for those audiences that I mentioned in the previous slide: state units on aging, area agencies on aging, and senior centers, and some other community partners as well. Each audience it considers what their main concerns are based on what we heard in the focus groups and the research that we did, and then what the message would be based on what those primary concerns are. So this is really intended to help state arts agencies emphasize the right value proposition. And this also speaks to what state arts agencies bring to the table, as far as like, if, it's not a given that a state arts agency would or could want to work with all of those partners. It might be that a given state arts agency has the best pathway for partnership right now with an area agency on aging. That's all that needs to be focused on. In time, it can build into these other partnerships, or maybe a state arts agency is ready to build partnerships on all of these levels. But the idea here is that there is a right value proposition for the right audience. And this messaging matrix just helps you dial in a really specific way so that you can focus and make progress in implementation quickly. As we know, it's not quick to build these partnerships, but this hopefully is a leg up. Next up is an actual customizable presentation, PowerPoint presentation for a cross-sector working session. The idea here is that having a ready-to-use presentation that's nicely branded, that's sort of part of the suite of other tools, it sets apart the conversation of creative aging in a way that underscores that we're well organized, we have a message, we have a whole program here that we're ready to deliver. And again, just very practically, it walks the participants of a working session through what's outlined in the vital program implementation guide, and highlights data, and then also includes some alignment exercises to get the folks in the working session to start to explore the most fruitful ways to partner. So it's a very active document. It's a PowerPoint presentation, gets people talking, gets people to the table, and leads to some next steps in what can be done as a collaboration. And then finally, the last component of the toolkit is this research summary and analysis. And I feel like, after hearing Heather speak, I'm like, oh, it's probably already ready for an update, because I think there really are a lot of findings coming out, and there hopefully will be plenty more in the years to come. But this really encapsulates, a synthesis of peer-reviewed research that can be a really helpful starting point for connecting to the right audiences, the evidence base that they might be most interested in. I think that, there's a way, like we talked about before, that research can be like requested, for the next step of any kind of partnership. Like, we're just going to need to see the research. So we really hope that this document provides state arts agencies a ready to give away document that really addresses, as Heather put it, what might be kind of a barrier to a next step in a productive, active collaboration. And with that, you can find the full toolkit online at NASAA, and it's also in the chat. And I am looking forward to some questions and answers from our audience today.
Well, thank you, Heather and Susan, so much for sharing these phenomenal resources. I think that these are really positioned to help advance this work in the field. And as Susan said, we're now going to open it up to questions. So invite participants, if you have any questions, you can either place them in the chat, or you are welcome to unmute and join the conversation. As folks are thinking of questions, of course, I have one in my back pocket. I'm curious now that you have both, and I know you're already familiar with these tools, but hearing them together in this space today, I'm curious from your perspectives how they connect and how state arts agencies and organizations might use them together in practice.
I would, I really just want to acknowledge, like, Heather, the really helpful tracking that Lifetime Arts is doing of what's happening in the policy spaces at all the levels that they interlock and intersect. I think that, the point that you made about the plans, state plans on aging and multi-sector plans on aging, they're taking place now. There's a process by which there's public input that's taking place, and figuring out what that timeline is and sort of trying to dial into that. It's hard work, and especially when it's not your brief for your particular job. So I want to acknowledge, like, how important it is, the work that Lifetime Arts is doing in tracking where those things are right now, and to just note that, like, between those, the process that's happening in a big picture and also the trending issues that are happening in that big picture, I think there's a lot of really fruitful opportunity to kind of take that in, understand where we are in the process of the planning, what the trending messages are that speak to healthy aging, and then work with maybe the NASAA toolkit to really get into that hyper local, super specific, like, where do you, whether you're a teaching artist, community-based arts organization, or state arts agency, where do you enter in now, and where? It's like, what's the time and place for you to do the work? And I think between these two documents, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to get some really good work done.
Yeah, I love that. Right back at you. I love what you all have produced. I think it's so helpful. And I think I just also want to, underscore, I think what's lovely about the toolkit that you produced is it's super easy to use, right? It's like I can pick this up and put it into action. I have some templates at the ready, right? And I think we hear that all the time, right? We are all at capacity. And that's why I stress, even with the policy brief, what was actually a lovely gift to develop the policy brief last year is that so much was changing. And there's a real emphasis in the policy brief, not on federal policy, although that is important, but in this moment, the power of state policy and local policy and planning to drive change, and that it's in a recognition that it's iterative, right? And that it's going to keep changing. And you can see, what I shared with that map, that the plans, are all in different stages of development, and they get renewed. And that's also true with age-friendly work at the local level, right? And so there's many different entry points, but the emphasis, as we worked through it at such, a really, hard year and hard moment, is that for our work, it's not about creating something totally new, right? It's actually about mapping out what already exists, whether that's a priority, a relationship, to your point, Susan, or an initiative that you or someone else adjacent to you has underway, where creative aging actually can align. Right?
Yeah.
It's sort of low-hanging fruit for really big impact over time. And what I love about the toolkit is, like, sometimes when we're working with agencies of all kinds, it's like, how do I actually write even that email? What's the first sentence so someone doesn't put it in their junk, right? Like, and I laugh, but that is very true, right? People are at capacity. We need help, like, not only because we need help, but because the people receiving those messages are also at capacity, right? And so there's great. And I think for us, the difference with the work that we're doing in the toolkit is that we're really supporting folks to translate what is happening on the ground and happening with those most affected local community-based organizations, older adults themselves, and translate that up to state policy and planning, right? Which is always going to be ever changing. So our messaging is actually more mapped to priorities rather than audience, because some of these are intersecting, right? So I think they complement each other quite well in that regard, and will. And I just also want to say that Susan and I have been working together for over a decade. And so neither of these were really developed in a vacuum. I think they speak to each
Yeah.
other because we speak to each other and have been partners in this work. And so I think that that's a win for all of us. Yeah. And for the work.
Appreciate that. Yeah. Quick tag. You mentioned capacity of potential partners. One of the really interesting and important parts of the research that we learned in doing this process is how at all the levels, state units on aging, area agencies on aging, and senior centers, folks were like, bring it on. Like, we love the arts. Let's make more of it happen. Capacity and relationship and networking were some of the barriers, rather than this sense that art is a luxury and we don't think it's worth it.
Yeah. I also want, this doesn't play as much of a like big picture role in the policy brief, but I would say one of the things I've been really excited about, maybe this actually harkens back to your earlier question, Megan, of what are we noticing in the field? I just came back from American Society on Aging conference where we got, there was a plenary on hearing from foundations and aging. Right. And one of the things that a lot of foundations are learning is that they have to get hyper local. They have to start in aging, not only bringing older adults, in to sit at the table and advise, but actually be a core strategy of how we move forward. Right. And I think what's wonderful and exciting about that is that I think arts have been part of every change and social change movement in this country. And I think the older adults that are part of creative aging programs, as well as older adult artists and creatives, in whether they have a degree or not, right? But they're practicing artists, are powerful drivers in messaging for this work and action. Right, and moving this work forward and thinking about how we can support them. And I will also say one of the things that I just actually had a great conversation with folks from the Neuro Arts Blueprint, and they're doing all this coalition work at, the state and local level. And they brought up the great point around, partnering with departments of labor to really uplift as we see more evidence around the benefits of arts and health and with older adults. How do we really support a workforce of practicing artists to deliver on all of these different kinds of approaches and practices, right? And I would include in that one of the things that we've seen great success in working in rural and frontier areas of states is really engaging older adult creatives who have trust-based relationships in those communities and employing them to do the work. Right. And I think in this conversation, we miss sometimes the fact that there are a lot of, we're aging as people live longer. Not everyone has saved for the future. Some people want to rewire and try something new and earn an income for it. And older adults are part of our workforce. And this is a great opportunity for us to elevate that and really get behind training, but also paying artists throughout our states to be able to increase access.
Well said. Well said. I think there's some really great takeaways there. I'm thinking about how you're both talking about alignment and that really connects with capacity, that if this work is aligned, it's how can we make this not just one more thing, but really integrated into the work that is happening in different spaces. The value of uplifting the voices of older adults in this work is huge, making sure that they are seen and heard in this work. And I love this connection with workforce and all of the connections that have been made throughout the session for cross-sector work and thinking of who those connections and partners are in this field. And all of those operate on all these different levels, right? I know we have folks at organizations here. We have folks that are with state arts agencies and with teaching artists, a range of attendees here. And so I'm hopeful that people found a nugget, a tool that they can take away today if you have a thought as participants in mind of something that maybe really resonated or something that you want to do or a tool that you're excited to use, I'd love for you to put it in the chat. Let's get some ideas going in these last minutes. So we are just about at time. So as we close today's session, I want to extend a sincere thank you to our speakers, Heather and Susan, for sharing their expertise, insights, and resources with us today. Blown away by the resources and everything that you all shared. I think it is inspiring and exciting in this moment. I hope that people are really feeling activated around creative aging and these resources. We are also deeply thankful to E.A. Michelson Philanthropy for their continued partnership and support of this work and of NASAA's broader creative aging initiatives. And finally, thank you to all of the participants for joining us today. We're grateful that you spent your time with us. As a reminder, today's session was recorded, and the recording, along with related resources, will be available on NASAA's Learning Series webpage. We hope these tools and ideas will continue to support your work advancing creative aging in your states and communities. Thank you all again, and have a great afternoon.